This program made possible by the Office of the Federal Coordinator for Alaska Natural Gas Transportation Projects, the University of Alaska Anchorage, and 360 North.
Well, good evening, and welcome to the 2012 William A. Egan Day Annual Forum. I'm John Stalvey, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at UAA, and I will serve as the moderator this evening. Ms. Wharton, are you ready to lead us in the flag song? Great. Everybody, please stand, and the songs are on your sheet.
Eight stars of gold on a field of blue, Alaska's flag, may it mean to you the blue of the sea, the evening sky, the mountain lakes, and the flowers nearby, the gold of the early Sardo streams, the precious gold of the hills and streams, the brilliant stars in the northern sky, the Bear, the Dipper, and shining high, the great North Star with its steady light will glend and see a beacon bright, Alaska's flag to Alaskans dear, the simple flag of a last frontier. A native lad chose the deepest stars for Alaska's flag, that there be no bars among our culture. Let it be known through years the natives past has grown to share life's treasures hand in hand, to keep Alaska our great land. We love the northern midnight sky, the mountains, lakes, and streams nearby, the great North Star with its steady light will guide all cultures clear and bright, with nature's flag to Alaskans dear, the simple flag of a last frontier.
Thank you. I want to thank Maura Wharton, who's a senior music performance major here in the College of Arts and Sciences, for sharing her talent with us this evening. Thank you, Maura. Second, I would like to thank our veterans, our retired military service members, and active duty service people and reserves. It's your service that affords us the freedom to gather with a common civic cause to freely debate the future of our Commonwealth as we do tonight. If you've dedicated your service to offering citizens like us the opportunity to gather like this, will you please stand and be recognized? Thank you. State Senator Dennis Egan could not be here. He sends his regrets. He's quite ill. However, I would like to welcome in his stead his aide, Kristen Crayanandonk, at the back. Thank you for coming, and please wish the senator to get well for us. Before we proceed any further, I'd like to recognize three men who served with Governor Egan as part of his administration. Attorney General John Havelock. John. Revenue Commissioner Eric Walforth. I don't see Eric. He's not here yet. He's engaged in the debate. And then Administration Commissioner Joseph Henry. As you may or may not know, these gentlemen also are the inspiration and genesis for the William A. Egan Day Annual Forum. So thank you for starting this. As you may know, I'm new to Alaska and new to Alaska's history. So in preparation for moderating this event tonight, I tried to read a variety of pieces on William Egan. From everything that I've read, I've picked up on a common theme or two about the governor. And I was pleased to see that the film that we were watching prior to this also picked up on at least some of these themes. First of all, he was a son of Alaska, and he was absolutely dedicated to doing his best for the benefit of Alaska and its people, all of its people. Second, that he is or was a gentle and soft-spoken man with patience and knowledge. And he used his knowledge of the political system to guide his fellow Alaskans to develop a state constitution and then led them on to statehood. But it is this gentle, soft-spoken demeanor and his patience that struck me the most. There was a citation on a portrait that was presented to William Egan in appreciation for presiding over the Constitutional Convention that seems to sum it up. He has demonstrated to all his parliamentary skills, his unwavering fairness, his personal friendliness, and his untiring devotion to duty. I was also struck by an opening quote in another piece that I read. This quote to me struck me particular because it was written by a close colleague of Governor Egan's, Mr. Joseph Henry, from his piece that he wrote last year, Tribute to Governor William Egan. Mr. Henry wrote that the 20th century English pundit, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, once observed, "There is a great man who makes every man feel small, but the real great man is the man who makes every man feel great." Bill Egan was such a man. Thank you for these words, Mr. Henry. Alaska Statute 44.12.060. Boy, is that dry. But it states that William A. Egan Day is established on October 8th of each year to honor William Bill Egan, the first governor of the state of Alaska, for a lifetime of service to the territory and the state of Alaska. William A. Egan Day may be observed by suitable observances and exercises by civic groups and the public. That's us. While we are familiar, I'm sure, with his work regarding the Alaska pipeline, particularly the oil pipeline, we may forget that he also was interested in a natural gas pipeline for Alaska. So we are here this evening to honor a great Alaskan and, while he watches, discuss an issue that he began to deal with some 40 years ago. This evening, we're discussing the other pipeline, the options for a North Slope natural gas pipeline. There are new challenges, but in many ways, this prospect is not unlike the one that the state has already tackled. To empower us with perspective, we're joined by three esteemed statesmen in their own rights today. Take it while you can get it, guys. Seattle native Jack Roderick served in the U.S. Navy Air Corps during World War II. He studied political science at Yale University. And after moving to Alaska, he earned a law degree at the University of Washington, and later a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University. Mr. Roderick's professional experience includes publishing, and among his early business interests were the oil exploration companies IB Inc. and the Alaska Exploration Corporation. In addition to practicing law, Mr. Roderick served as Alaska State Democratic Party chairman from 1985 to 1988. In addition, he has held several other governmental positions, including Regional Director of the U.S. Peace Corps in India, Greater Anchorage Area Borough Mayor from 1972 to 1975, Deputy Commissioner of the Alaska State Department of Natural Resources, Alaska Director of the U.S. Farmers Home Administration from 1978 to 1979, and Alaska State Energy Director. Jack Roderick may be known to many of us many of you, as the author of Crude Dreams, A Personal History of Oil Politics in Alaska. I also want to note that he received an honorary Doctor of Laws from the UAA in 2005. Mike Dugan is a third-generation Alaskan. He's 59. I'm not sure why that was in my notes. He was born in Fairbanks, and he lived in Anchorage since 1964. He's a graduate of West Anchorage High School and the University of San Francisco. Mr. Dugan has been a teamster, a janitor, a baggage handler, a mailroom flunky, his words off of his website, a writing teacher, and a legislative aide, but worked most of his life as a journalist and writer. For 14 years, he was a columnist for the Anchorage Daily News. He is the author of 3 acclaimed books about Alaska and editor of a collection of essays on life here. Until recently, he was writing mystery novels and serving in the Alaska House of Representatives. Are those two related somehow? Most importantly, Mr. Dugan holds an MFA from the University of Alaska Anchorage, and we are eager to welcome him back this coming spring semester to serve as the Atwood Chair of Journalism at UAA. Yeah. He'll then go by Professor Dugan. Larry Persley serves as the federal coordinator for Alaska natural gas transportation projects, leading a staff in Washington, D.C. and Anchorage, Alaska, to coordinate the work of federal permitting agencies for Alaska North Slope natural gas pipeline. President Barack Obama nominated Mr. Persley for the job on December 9, 2009. The U.S. Senate confirmed the nomination March 10, 2010. Mr. Persley started work the next week. Now, that is a quick turnaround. Who says government always moves slowly? Before taking on the federal assignment, Mr. Persley worked in Alaska on oil, gas, and gas issues over a decade for 3 governors and the Alaska State Legislature, including ongoing efforts to develop a pipeline to move North Slope gas to the market. See a theme here? He assisted the state in its work to negotiate a contract with North Slope oil and gas producers toward developing a natural gas pipeline. Most recently, he served as an associate director in the Alaska Governor's Office in Washington, D.C., working on oil and gas, Arctic commerce, transportation, and tax issues. Now, Mr. Persley also has had a long career in journalism in Alaska, working as an editor at the Anchorage Daily News, Juneau Empire, and the Paper of Juneau, and working as a reporter for Petroleum News, the Associated Press, Anchorage Daily News, and Anchorage Times. And he co-owned the Wrangell and Sentinel from 1976 to 1984. He graduated from Purdue University, West Lafayette, Indiana, and holds a bachelor's degree in journalism. The only hole in his resume, as far as I can see, is that he does not hold a degree from UAA yet. Please help me in welcoming our distinguished guests, panelists. The way this will work is that each one of the panelists will speak for about 10 minutes, and I have a timer, so I will shock them if they don't. And then we'll open the floor to questions. There's a microphone on the floor over here that we request, and I'll remind you again when it's over with, but we would ask that you please use the microphone because this is being taped and televised. So without further ado, Mr. Roderick.
Thank you, Dean. Can you hear me all right? 10 minutes, huh? I'm sorry. I'll try to keep it to 10 minutes for my other speakers. This is a great crowd here, lots of old-timers and distinguished people. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm going to talk about the early history. I hope I don't bore you with that, but that's what I've decided to do. We were to discuss the options for a North Slope natural gas pipeline, and I'm to discuss the early developments. Well, most of my talk will be about the oil pipeline, but still I'll get a little gas in there somewhere. I hope that we can generate some questions and have discussion afterwards because I think that's really what this format is about, to get a dialogue going with the university people. The program includes what I find a very interesting phrase. Remember when we were all in this together. Whoever wrote that must have been thinking about how we were all in this together, wanting statehood in the 1950s when I arrived. We felt then that we wanted to be in control of our lives, shape our new frontier's destiny, and to do what we needed to do to become a state. All this destiny talk began well before any commercial oil and gas had been discovered in Alaska. But do we still want to control our destiny? The first discovery of commercial oil and gas in Alaska happened slightly before we became a state. In the summer of 1957, on the Kenai Peninsula, at Swanson River, a relatively small oil company, Richfield, discovered petroleum in commercial quantities. A year and a half later, in early January 1959, President Eisenhower signed the statehood bill, making us American citizens in the 49th state, with a right for the first time to vote for governor. In January, Bill Egan became our first governor. Because he needed money to organize his new government, he held the first state's oil and gas bonus bid lease sale offshore Cook Inlet. During the following 60s, we saw oil drilling platforms rise in the inlet, natural gas piped to Anchorage for residential use, and LNG shipped from Nikiski to Japan. It looked like we were going to be just an ordinary, another oil state. We'd be unlike Texas and Oklahoma, of course, because all of our oil and gas lands would be publicly owned. That was Wally Hickles' favorite phrase, right? The owner state. Unlike those other southern states, we had very little privately owned land. However, with Cook Inlet production, it looked like we would have enough to support ourselves. That was 50 plus years ago, which may seem a long time to some. I was hoping more students would be here, but it seems rather recent to me. We were doing okay. Egan helped form a strong government underlaid by a strong model state constitution. Then in 1964, the earthquake. Coincidentally, just a few months earlier, Egan had selected some land on the North Slope. I see Tom Marshall here. He was the geologist inside the government advising these people that they might find a little oil up on the North Slope. But after the earthquake, Egan needed more money for recovery. So in late 64, and again in mid-65, he had the state hold 2 oil and gas lease sales on the land that had been selected. For those leases at Kaparik and then Prudhoe, the state received from each around $6 million in bonus bids. British Petroleum, Atlantic Richfield, and its partner Exxon were the primary bidders. As some like to say, the rest is history. Of course, Richfield ultimately went into Arco, Atlantic Refining, and then, of course, when BP grabbed Arco, we being a group, saw to it that they didn't take Arco in Alaska, and of course that went to ConocoPhillips. So just 10 years after Swanson River, the two largest oil fields in America, Prudhoe Bay and later Kuparuk, had been discovered. Just 2 days after Christmas, 1967, Arco discovered oil at Prudhoe Bay. Its reserves were estimated at 21 billion barrels. Now I think its estimate is 26. The oil recovery at 9.6 billion barrels. Of course, today the field has produced more than 15 million barrels. Oil production now is decreasing, as you know. The amount flowing through the TAPS pipeline is also going down. These facts have never been kept a secret. Ever since the first barrel of oil began its trip down the pipeline, beginning at Pump Station 1 to Valdez on that summer day in 1977, the big three oil companies have known this would eventually happen. And I'm sure they have planned for it. The reserves of natural gas at Prudhoe were originally set at 21 trillion cubic feet. Now I think it's 23. And now with Point Thompson reserves, it's said to be about 31 trillion cubic feet. Much of the gas at Prudhoe has been re-injected into the oil fields to help recover more oil. And you'll hear more about that, I think, from Mike and Larry. At a Brookings Institution Future of Alaska conference held in 1969, about a year after Prudhoe Bay, citizens from all parts of Alaska came to Alaska to try to decide what the big oil discovery on the slope meant to Alaska's future. What kind of a state would we become? About half, I was a participant, about half the participants felt that Alaska could now become just like the other South 48. Others felt that we should slow down, find out what kind of a community we really wanted. Are we still trying to answer that identity question? After 35 years, having most of our bills paid for from oil royalties and taxes, can we still make an intelligent decision? What would Bill Egan say? He'd probably share our frustration with the gas line. Egan and most other politicians in the early days thought outside interests like Alaska Steamship Company, the Seattle-owned fish traps, and the Wall Street-owned Kennecott copper mines were controlling our future. What would Bill Egan be thinking looking at Alaska today? I know what Wally Hickel believed because he helped found Backbone. And am I showing my pro-Egan Hickel bias? I hope I am. I'm sure some of you have read Bob Bartlett's comments to the Constitutional Convention about the development of our natural resources and the outside political tensions. And I suggest that maybe you do that. It's a great speech. In 1966, Wally Hickel beat Egan for the governorship. 2 years later, President Nixon appointed Hickel Secretary of the Interior. In September '69, then Governor Keith Miller, having succeeded Hickel, held a lease sale of unleased state land at Prudhoe. Some say we blew the $900 million we received, and the state budget did expand fourfold the next year. Egan, at the time out of elected office, said the state should have held back some of the land until it knew more about what it was worth. And he was probably right. Then in 1970, Egan beat Miller. Construction of the TAPS pipeline had been delayed by land claims of Alaska natives and other lawsuits, which gave Egan time for a new idea. He asked the CEOs of BP, Arco, and Exxon, plus 5 other oil company pipeline executives, to come to Juneau. There in his office in Juneau, he told them he wanted the state to own the pipeline. Not just part of the pipeline, all of it, or none of it. He didn't want the state to be partners, this is my comment, or get in bed with the oil companies. Why shouldn't citizens of the state be given pipeline tariff money rather than company shareholders? Particularly if the pipeline owners could set their own tariffs. After 10 days of public hearings in Juneau, Egan could get only 3 state senators to support his ownership idea. It was just too big, it would cost too much. There is one senator who voted for it in the audience today, Willie Hensley. Joe Josephson was another, and Ed Murdy's from Fairbanks, who's now dead, was the third. But it was, and I interviewed John Rader, who was a real good thinker, and he just said it was just too big. You know, it's $9 billion as it turned out. Now I think the situation is a little different. We have the money, so I'm not recommending owning pipelines, but it's an idea that should be examined. In 1970, Egan had already selected Joe Henry, Eric Wohlforth, and John Havelock, who are all in the audience. So when we come to the discussion part, make sure that you ask them what they know about that pipeline ownership story and what they think about our future in Alaska. A little more about Egan to end. What kind of a man was Bill Egan? People could trust him. That's very important in politics. His mantra seemed to be, what's good for Alaska? It wasn't always, I know politicians, you got to think about yourself some of the time. But in Bill's case, it was, what's good for Alaska? He was born in Alaska, storekeeper at one town in Valdez, an avid pilot, elected to the assembly, then a legislator, speaker of the House in '51, senator in '52, and of course, president of the Constitutional Convention in 1955 in Fairbanks. He married Neva, teacher, and of course, one son, the senator from Juneau today, Dennis. And I add this only to say that a lot of people seem to think people enter politics to get rich. I don't think so, personally, and certainly not him. When he retired, he worked as the manager of Electrical Trust Fund of Local 1547 of International Brotherhood of Electric Workers and Electrical Contractors Association. That's no way to get rich, as you know. A few quotes. Got to have a few quotes. Betsy Tower, Elizabeth Tower, in her Alaska Homegrown Governor book, says Egan did not trust the oil industry. He wanted to make sure that the state would receive maximum benefit from oil development. Vic Fisher, in his Alaska Constitution Convention book, says Bill Egan, as president of the convention, showed good sense, humor, and sympathy. He helped inexperienced delegates over rough spots. Vic has just come out with a memoir, and I don't know the name of it, or else I'd give it to you. And John Havelock, in his newly released Let's Get It Right book, calling for another constitutional convention, says Egan personified the impulses of friendship and loyalty that Alaskans used to describe the typical Alaskan. I knew Bill Egan socially and politically, and I've got a lot of tales, but I don't have time. He was a terrific guy. We were awfully lucky to have him. Finally, well, I won't talk anymore about the destiny question, but the potential up in the slope is tremendous still, and I mean really tremendous. And the USGS geologists are estimating another maybe 200 trillion cubic feet of gas. So we don't need to, and new companies are coming in all the time. So let's not get discouraged. My buddies here are going to tell you about what the prospects, or the options are of the gas pipeline, and it may not be as optimistic as I'm saying. But it's your show now, Mike and Larry. Thank you.
Next, we have Professor Dugan.
Thank you. Don't worry, there will not be a test later. I've always wanted to speak to a group who pretty clearly knows more about the subject than I do. As I look at the audience, several of them having had their hands involved in the whole question of the gas pipeline. Unfortunately, that's all been so far of no avail. And what I wanted to start with was just to give a brief timeline from basically from where Jack left off of what's happened on the gas pipeline. So in 1977, President Carter decided that the gas pipeline would have to go through Canada and would not be an all-Alaska route. This caused some consternation among people in Alaska, but was an irrevocable decision on his part at that point. Of course, nothing happened. In 1983, the Institute of Social and Economic Research issued a report that said basically there isn't any market for natural gas from Alaska. Did another report that same year called A Survey of Projects and Their Likely Impact on Alaska Gas Pipeline, which again concluded that there was just no way to get here from there. And just to put the icing on the cake, they issued a report in August, I think it was, of that same year that listed 15 rules that would have to be followed in order to get a gas pipeline built in the state of Alaska. I went back and looked at the 15 rules. I can't repeat them for you here from memory, but I can only say that there's 3 or 4 of them that are still hanging there, including, of course, the sort of the gas the pipeline cost problem, cost and benefit problem, I guess I should say. From there, again, there was just a long hiatus. People talked, particularly politicians, talked a lot about we want a gas pipeline and we should build a gas pipeline, and you know, my opponent isn't doing enough to push a gas pipeline forward. But essentially nothing happened but talk until 1998, when the legislature passed the Stranded Gas Development Act, which was intended to eventually come to an agreement between the governor and the major oil companies on how to develop the gas pipeline. It was amended in 2003 to make the terms sort of better for the oil companies. And in 2004, an outfit then called, I guess it was still called TransCanada, submitted an application under that act. It said, among other things, that the application says the pipeline will be completed and in service by December 31st, 2012. So I guess they missed it by a little bit. And then in 2006, Frank Murkowski submitted this contract, essentially, between the 3 major oil companies and the state for the gas pipeline, and it failed. And it was that session that it failed in that subsequently led to several members of the legislature being indicted and convicted for their performance there. Not exactly a happy history. Secondly, what we have, then from there you want to talk for a minute, or I want to talk for a minute about the oil and gas taxation. And it's very difficult to talk about oil taxation without talking about oil. There's just never been any well, until recently, any significant division between the two, I guess is what I should say, even though they're often taxed differently or you know, the terms of producing them are different. The fact of the matter is it's always been oil and gas up until 2007, I think. And those were, some of you might remember some of these, began in 1977 with what they called ELF, which was the economic limit factor, that ran until 1989. That was subsequently amended, basically to get the state more money, and ran until 2006. There for, you know, a minute and a half, the taxes were aggravated. Then for another year, there was what they called PPT, or the Petroleum Profits Tax. And from there, what is, I love this term, Alaska's Clear and Equitable Share, which is ACES, was the law of the land. So what we can see from this is, and of course there's I should note that there's now talk about changing things again, this time for the benefits of the oil companies, I believe. But what we can see from this is, as I said, first, that oil and gas has generally been treated in Alaska as a single entity. So it's very difficult to talk about, you know, what happened to gas much before right now. And second, all of these changes haven't really done anything to advance the cause of natural gas. You know, they're sort of in the same chapters, and you know, there'll be a section or two that talks about gas, but actually nothing substantial was done, unless you count the disastrous special session, what would be 7 years ago now, I guess it would be, up until Governor Sarah Palin introduced another, she was great at acronyms. This was AGIA, which is the Alaska Gas Line Inducement Act, that was intended on her part to move a gas line forward. The idea was that at the end of the process, there would be a FERC license, and hopefully during the run-up to that, there would be enough gas subscribed to by anybody who wanted it, basically, that there'd be enough to finance the pipeline. At that time, of course, because the rule still going all the way back to 1977 was the line had to run through Canada, the discussion was all about a pipeline that ran through Canada. I actually know a little bit about this. This is the only part that I actually have any actual experience with, because I was a member of the legislature when this was put forth. It was finally called, I got to put this into because I just love the way that legislation passes through the House and the Senate. In the end, it was committee substitute, a Senate committee substitute for House Bill 177 Finance, which means the Finance Committee messed with it too. So it had been substantially vetted by the time it was finished. And it passed the Senate 20-0, passed the House 37 to 1, and I'm surprised that the one vote isn't here to sort of get up and wave to the audience, because it turns out you never really have right or wrong in politics, just like you never have a beginning and an end. But it turns out that Ralph is probably more right than I was on this one at this point. The most interesting thing to my mind about this particular piece of legislation is the one thing that I actually had my fingers on. There had been the way this was supposed to work is the state would hand out as much as $500 million to the successful bidder, which in this case was TransCanada. And in return, it would get a series of rules or considerations, whatever you would call them, called the must-haves. And one of those must-haves that went back and forth there was whether or not there would be something called a project labor agreement, which means that it would be built with what would I call them, Harry? Alaskans. Well put. Actually, that it would be built by union people more than anything else. And so it was in the original bill. It got taken out in one of the Senate committees. It got put back in. It went to the House. It was in and out 3 or 4 times. We got it to the floor, and it was out. So I didn't think that was the right thing to do. My father had been, in addition to be a member of the Constitutional Convention, was a strong labor guy. And I'm sure he would have come back to haunt me if I had let that go. So I went around trying to collect the votes for putting it back in. And the first guy I went and talked to was John Harris, who was the Speaker of the House then. And he said, yeah. He said, put my name on it. Put it right at the top so everybody sees it's there. And at the end of that, we got 25 votes, I think it was, to put it back in, and the bill passed, like I said, 37-1. We'd agreed then that there was going to be an attempt to have somebody come in and do the work. And after a lot of back and forth in the next year, TransCanada again, those guys really stuck around, again, got the contract to do it. There was more wrangling about this, and in the end, after 2 special sessions, I think this time, the bill passed both the House and the Senate. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing now, but unfortunately, the economic reality is that it's entirely possible that everything they are going to do and all the money that gets spent is going to be academic, at least right now. Because when, in fact, this was done, there was a spike in natural gas prices. The bill that was voted on at a time when the average value of the wellhead price for natural gas in the U.S. was $7.50. Right now, it's about $2.80. And as you can see, the difficulty of getting support, getting people to put money on the table here to buy parts of that gas has gone down tremendously because there's a lot more cheap gas, a lot easier to get at. And so when you see things like the shale oil business getting going and the associated natural gas with it, you can see that things just really aren't running in our direction now. There's always a possibility that the value of it's going to go up enough to make this happen, but the problem is that natural gas is a commodity that's subject to rapid and sharp increases and decreases. So unless you're going to bet on the average over the long term, which very few people are willing to do given the way the stuff is priced, you're probably not going to get a gas pipeline. It might be my kids or my grandkids who might be able to go work on that pipeline, but I doubt very much that it's going to be anybody my age or substantially younger. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to somebody who actually knows something. And before I do that, I would just want to recognize that former Governor Bill Sheffield's in the audience. I saw you sneak in there, Bill, but good to see you.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Pursley.
Before I start my remarks, I guess to put a plug in for our office, we had put together a booklet on the 40-year history of an effort to get a gas line built, and there are copies on the table out in the lobby. I guess, in a way, I'm sort of going to be the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, if you think of a gas line as a Christmas present. Yeah. As Jack and Mike both have said, little has changed in pipeline politics over the last 40 years. Instead of talking about oil, we're talking about gas, and the debate continues about state ownership, state investment, state control of a gas line, just like it did on the oil line 40 years ago. But that's what's great about the Alaska gas line debate is people like myself and Mike Dugan don't have to learn anything new, and we can still make a living talking about the same thing we've been talking about for 40 years. No offense, Mike, now that you're a professor.
None taken.
And now that you're a professor, I'd like to talk to you about fixing my grades. So, Governor Egan in '71 was frustrated that the oil line wasn't built. Very frustrated, sharing the frustration of Alaskans. He was frustrated and he felt that Alaska was at the mercy of big oil, that the pipeline was going to happen on their schedule, not our schedule. He had a plan to force the issue, as Jack Roderick talked about. State ownership, the legislature defeated it for a lot of reasons, so we waited. Eventually, oil started flowing in 1977. And by today's standards, that's not bad. It was only 6 years. But like I say, I don't think anything's really changed in that underlying core debate. We're frustrated now over the lack of a gas line. We believe, or many Alaskans believe, big oil is stalling. Big oil is going to move at its own pace, which is not Alaska's pace. A similarity we have to the 70s is we need the money. That young state needed the money from an oil line in the 70s. We're back there again this decade. Oil production's falling. If you're an optimist, you'd say the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline is 1/4 full. If you're a pessimist, you would say it's 3/4 empty. We're going to likely, in this decade, learn to live with budget deficits, just like we did through the 1990s, drawing on our savings to cover spending. There are those Alaskans who are increasingly saying, the hell with the oil companies. Let's go out there, let's write a check, let's borrow billions, let's build that gas line on our own. And then count the profits because the oil companies will capitulate and use it if we build it. Same argument from the 70s, I think, when people were waiting for that oil line. But looking at today, Alaska, I would maintain, financially needs that gas line more than it emotionally wants it. And we certainly emotionally want it a lot. We need the gas line to reduce energy costs in Fairbanks by hundreds of millions of dollars a year, which is going to put real money into household and business pockets, way more than they would ever see in their share that gets dispersed by the legislature from production taxes. You need a gas line for the energy, to help reduce energy costs in the interior and coastal communities that could get some BTU out of that, whether it's compressed natural gas, liquefied natural gas, propane, some BTUs derived from that pipeline and spread around the state. I think you need a gas line for the energy security it would provide for the population center in South Central. Alaska needs a gas line for the $50 to $60 billion in investment it will bring to the state to build the gas treatment plant, the pipeline, compressor stations, liquefaction plants, storage tanks, shipping terminals, and all the indirect spending that would ensue. And I think Alaskans need a gas line for the tens of billions of dollars of additional investment in oil and gas exploration and development that would occur once you have a gas line. The real benefit, I guess, from a gas line, I want to call them indirect, but that's where the benefits are going to be. The cash, the tax benefits are going to come from the oil that gets produced along with increased exploration. The tax benefits are not going to come from the natural gas. To illustrate, the state last fiscal year took in $9.5 billion from the oil industry in production tax, corporate income tax, and royalty on oil. $9.5 billion. If you assume the estimate that the companies have given us for a gas line liquefaction plant, $45 to $65 billion is the new estimate, and that's for the entire package. Under current law, assuming a plausible value for that gas on the wellhead, after you deduct the mortgage for that $65 billion project, the operating cost, the debt service, under current law, the state might make $1 billion a year in royalty and production tax income from a big gas line, compared to $9.5 billion off oil. As they say, $1 billion a year is nothing to sneeze at, but it's not enough to pay the bills for the public services as oil production declines. And that guesstimate of $1 billion assumes no changes in the tax structure. So I think, again, you need to look at the benefits you get from a gas line, but not count the tax dollars as the savior to carry us for the next 40 years like oil has. So I think we need to try harder. We need to try something different with a gas line, just like Egan looked 40 years ago for something different. But we need to be aware of our competition out there in the world and what it's going to take to sell Alaska gas into the marketplace. State financial participation wasn't a terribly bad idea 40 years ago, but the state was too young and too broke to get into that business. I think maybe we were naively hopeful that somehow state dollars could change the economics of a project. State dollars don't change the economics. It just means someone else is taking the risk. We're not so young anymore. We're not so broke. Between the constitutional budget reserve, the statutory budget reserve, the permanent fund, I don't know, $56 billion, give or take. We have some money in savings. I think the state needs to look at a way to participate in a gas line. It might be deferring taxes during the early years to allow a quicker capital cost recovery for the private investors. It might be being a stopgap lender to cover cost overruns, a founding lender, an equity participant, something that might help the economics of that project. We've got to look at the competition. The world doesn't need our gas. I don't care how much we have. I don't care how much we think they do. They don't. North America does not need Alaska gas. Shale gas has oversupplied North America. Pennsylvania, which is not a long history of natural gas production, Pennsylvania is producing on average 6 billion cubic feet a day, twice as much as you're talking about in Alaska on a large LNG project. Look around the world, they're finding gas in Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya. Russia is developing 2 projects, maybe a third. Australia has $170 billion of LNG export projects under construction. So as you look around, you have a commodity that nobody particularly needs, but you want to get into the marketplace. You've got to scale back your financial expectations and see, I think as a state, what we could do to help. Our competitors, Russia, Qatar, Australia, they've negotiated development deals to get their projects moving, looking at the long-term benefits, not those cash benefits in the early years. We need to learn from our competitors. Lenders on a project like this are going to want stable fiscal terms. They're going to want signed contracts, long-term contracts that match the length of the mortgage before they loan money. So coming ahead to today, where are we? We've got the 3 big North Slope producers, BP, Conoco, ExxonMobil, and TransCanada. They're looking at a multi-billion-dollar project to export gas overseas. Pipeline, gas treatment plant, liquefaction terminal. No, there are no promises this time it's going to work. There's no guarantees. It's way too early for that. But they are spending money reimbursed, as Mike Dugan said, through the state, up to $500 million. But they are spending money looking to see if they can put this together. I think it's going to be a couple years before they could get a project application ready for submission to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That's a 2-year process for the environmental impact statement. Earliest, you would get what's called a final investment decision, a decision by corporate boards to go ahead with it. It's probably 2016 at best. Maybe gas would flow in 21, 2022 at best. So yeah, the dream is still years away, even after been waiting 40 years. But I think instead of giving up, we need to realize how much we need it, what can we do to help to get that gas into the marketplace, it would be, at the 45 to 65 billion, the most expensive natural gas project ever in the world. I think we've got to recognize that. I think there are potential buyers out there. Maybe state involvement would help. If we can come up with a fiscal structure for everyone's benefit. And I think that's something Governor Egan also looked at. You know, what can you do that benefits everybody, not just a particular town that gets the construction jobs? And measure that benefit for Alaskans, not just in the tax dollars you squeeze out of it, but the total benefit for the state in energy savings and security and investment is possible. And for that,
Thank you, Larry.
and of course, the federal government's behind you all the way. No problem.
How far behind?
Yeah, how far?
Way.
Well, thank you, all three of you, for your comments and thoughtful presentation. We'll now welcome questions from the audience. Before we do so, though, I'm going to put in a plug for the Egan Scholarship. This event is a fundraiser, surprise. On the back of your program, you may have noticed a gift form, I believe. Yes, good. At least these guys got them. If you value this sort of dialogue, you can take a moment and invest in the future of Alaska, or you can wait until you get home and put it in the envelope that are on either one of, I think, stands on either side. The Governor Bill Egan Scholarship at UAA supports UAA students who are committed to their community and who have shown a great potential for public service by providing tuition and other educational expenses to students who are formally admitted, never mind, officially, there we go, admitted into the political science or history degree program at the University of Alaska Anchorage or Prince William Sound Community College campuses. So please fill out the gift form and or contact our development office listed for information. The second thing I want to remind you is that this event and dialogue to follow are being recorded for broadcast on KTOO. So again, please use the microphone that's over there on the floor. Now joining us for the first question of the event of this evening is UAA's 2012 Governor William A. Egan Scholar, Aaron Nichols. Aaron is a Marine veteran pursuing a double major, not just one of those two, but both, in history and political science, and seeking future employment in public service. I understand that he's a scholar of World War II and the Russian provincial government of 1917. So, gentlemen, be prepared. Aaron?
So, gentlemen, my question basically revolves around kind of historical looking at things, because that's my first love is history. No offense to the political science folks out there, but Governor Egan's legacy is based on leadership and dedication to public service. What can the current state leaders do to uphold that legacy and ensure that they do what's best for the state throughout in regards to this natural gas pipeline?
Mike,
Thanks.
yeah.
Well, I guess I'm at least the first one to answer this question, which is not too easy to answer. The difficulty that we have here is not necessarily political in the sense that it's Democrats versus Republicans. It's that there's no consensus behind any particular method of moving this forward. As an example, I give you a piece of legislation that was passed, no, it wasn't passed, it was set forth year before last, which invited the legislature to declare the gas pipeline process a failure and to basically pay off TransCanada at some reduced rate. This wasn't just a bunch of hotheads in the legislature. This was the entire group of leaders in the House of Representatives. So, if anything, you can say that consensus is exploding, where you had at one point, 20-0 and 39-0 votes in favor of a way to deal with oil and gas. You now have the leadership trying to sort of cut it off at the ankles. As long as that's going to be the case, as long as there's going to be a sort of a zero-sum debate, politically, we're just not going to go anywhere. And the fact of the matter is that we can't catch up world events long enough for it to make economic sense all the way through the process of permitting and building a gas pipeline. You know, there's been talk, and Larry did some of it, about subsidizing a gas pipeline into existence somehow, you know, paying cash or committing the state for cost overruns or anything like that. But I got to tell you, at the rate we're spending money right now, we just signed a $3 billion capital budget and what was it, $8 billion, $9 billion, something like that in operating. It's just not going to last long enough for us to be able to finance, you know, even to guarantee a gas pipeline. The political reality is that this is just something that we're talking about the way we've talked about for 40 years. And until somebody comes up with a comprehensive way of dealing with this and shows the leadership to get it done, that's all we're going to be doing. Sorry to rain on everybody's parade, but that's my assessment to the situation.
Eric?
Well, maybe it's... Pardon? Go ahead.
Oh, I guess building on what Mike said, you know, at one point the state had 3 state agencies working on different variations of the gas line. We had the Alaska Gas Line Inducement Act, which is the state reimbursing the TransCanada team 90% for expenses to see if they can put together a project. We had the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation. We had the Alaska Natural Gas Development Authority. We're pulling in so many different directions. We're pulling against ourselves. I think we need to come up with one plan, stick with it, see if we can pull it together, and to answer your question, I think be honest with people. Don't tell them we're breaking ground in 2 years. Don't tell them we're further than ever before. Tell them the truth. We have a commodity that the world is oversupplied. Maybe there's a way we can get in there, and this is what we're going to work on instead of 3 or 4 different things at one time. Again, we just keep pulling against ourselves.
I think our problem, well, number one, we have too many options in the Cook Inlet area, and everybody's got their own, you know, bureaucracy that's trying to come out on the top. I'm more worried about the long term. We're now an oil state. I wouldn't have said that 50 years ago. I would have been comfortable saying that. But now we're in the big world, you know, multinationals. And I think the politics of the state now for the next, well, forever maybe, you know, who's in control? Are we in control of our destiny, or does the corporate boards decide? It's same old argument, you know. It's like Romney and Obama, you know. Same thing. Jobs, we need jobs, always we need jobs. But at what price? So I'm showing my long-term bias. Who's in control? We've got to step right up to the boards and the CEOs and say, this is what we want. And we can make it stick politically. It's hard to do, but we should try it.
Thank you, and thank you all for your sharing your views. Mike, just one aside, I want to give you a warning, just kind of a reversal. When I left the university for the legislature, they said I was leaving a very political arena for just the legislature. So remember, you're going the other way. My question is, personally, all three of you, do you think, one, that the state should own a gas line? And two, do you think, reading your own personal tea leaves, the public would look beyond their next permanent fund dividend and support the tens of billions of dollars it would cost?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Okay. No, I don't think we should. It's a multi-billion-dollar operation. I don't think the state would, the citizens would buy that. But but I think personally, 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, there's maybe a national security problem, and Congress will step in and say, we need the gas in the South 48. To hell with the marketplace. I think that's the only thing I can see.
Yeah, and I'd have to say that if you just, it's unlikely if you just look at the history of oil here. You know, there was a point at which the state government, Bill Egan, wanted to control the oil pipeline himself. And in fact, there was talk at the time of building it, paying to build it. I don't know exactly where they were going to get the money, but that's what they were talking about. You know, and that didn't happen. But the idea that we're going to suddenly decide, you know, we're going to spend, geez, I don't know how many $billion it would be now, you know, the 65 maybe, is that the latest number that just keeps going up? That the state is going to somehow find the money, it doesn't have it, then somehow borrow the money, which would be a heck of an achievement. I don't really think that it's possible. I don't think we have the assets, frankly, to guarantee $65 billion. And I don't think the markets will overlook that. It's, you know, it's just, you never say never in this business. But it's one of the most unlikely things that I could think of happening.
My fear is, I don't think it's that unlikely, but I think it's a bad idea for three reasons. One, government doesn't run private projects very well. And the seafood plant in South Anchorage is a great example. That was built for political reasons, non-economic reasons. The state finally sold it off for 40 cents on the dollar and still had to finance the deal.
Hey, that was in my district, man.
And Representative Dugan delivered for his constituents. Two, you build a project like that, you take the risk something goes wrong. Many of us remember the Trans-Alaska oil pipeline was supposed to be $900 million and ended up being $8 billion. Do you want to be governor or legislator and say that year stay the state? Well, project's sort of over budget and behind schedule. I need to take some more money out to pay the bills, so we're going to have a little problem with troopers this year. Third reason, and I think this is one of my favorites, I guess. I don't think the state should be in business of owning something it regulates. I think the conflict is really bad to get into because you're going to have labor laws, safety laws, environmental laws, and you're going to have to say, well, I want to enforce it, but it's going to cost me money because I own it.
Norway does it.
Well, Norway's culture is a little different than Alaska. They're a little more accepting of government regulation and taxation. So I think it's a bad idea.
The United States is accepting to government as long as somebody else is paying the bill.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, just historically, Egan would have hired the oil companies to build the thing. You know, a railroad is publicly owned. I don't buy the argument that the government can't do anything right.
But
If you structure it right.
My name's Tom Marshall. I'm a retired geologist. I worked for the state for about 18 years. I signed the permit to drill for the Prudhoe Bay State one. And whereas it seems there is sort of a dire point of view about there not being a gas line, I must admit that when the gas cap was discovered at Prudhoe Bay, I was very happy because previous to that I'd worked at the Black Mountain oil field in Wyoming where we had 4 ounces of gas pressure which operated all our pumping units, and if atmospheric conditions were such that the pressure ran to 3 ounces, everything would shut down, and I as a pumper would have lots of work to do. The other thing is there is an absolutely huge potential for oil income in the heavy oil reserves on the North Slope. Gas burned to generate steam is the way this is usually mobilized in the reservoir. You can say, well, why not burn crude oil? Well, with the present regulations, burning crude oil makes a lot of black smoke. Gas does not. The other thing is that
Sir, is there a question?
the gas
Sir,
that has been in the Prudhoe Bay Reservoir to enhance recovery will, and this is an estimate, but I think the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission would go along with it, will generate another 1.5 billion barrels of oil at, what, $90 a barrel. And it's a tremendous economic asset to produce as much oil as we can. As a matter of fact, it's the way things are done. And I can understand how there's this huge desire to sell gas because we need money, because we spent an awful lot of money. We need income, and that's what people are targeting on. But the gas on the North Slope has other benefits. I mean, I'm not against selling the gas if there's a market for it, but I'm saying that the gas itself is a great asset to our state economy. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next. Actually, do any of the panelists?
My
like
name
to
is Jerry
comment?
McCutcheon. Most of you have my handout. I'll correct Tom on one thing. It's closer to 9 billion barrels of additional oil, Tom. The OIP is 32 billion barrels. And that was in 1977. And that grows with time. I'll just put it this way, and it's simple. You cannot construct the world's most expensive gas conditioning plant, the world's most expensive 739-mile gas line, and the world's most expensive LNG terminal, and compete with those who have their gas at Tidewater and need none of the above. Thank you.
He's right.
Panelists?
He's right.
Yeah, okay.
Hey.
Two extremely hard acts to follow. The man that discovered it, among other things. Just a couple of comments. One is what's obvious to you but may not be to all of the participants, that Alaska's history the last 45 years of oil development is the history of a small, understaffed, beginning state dealing with the largest industrial institutions that mankind has ever developed and established. And that fact sort of has permeated all of our our negotiations. The Murkowski ones were the most torturesome. In fact, Murkowski put a contract to the legislature which the battalions, regiments, division of lawyers hadn't even yet completed. I mean, that's one thing. What I've got one background historical fact that I think has to be borne in mind whenever we deal with this, and it's sort of exemplified by the oil companies coming up and saying, well, the line is going to cost between 45 and 60 billion dollars. In other words, they can't come within 30% of an accurate estimate. Give me a break. I find that outlandish almost. That this would be the result of many years' work. My question, besides those comments, is mostly to Larry, to any of the smaller pipeline efforts. And it would be great if you could just summarize what they are, and because the state is spending a lot of money, at least on one of them, the former Alaska Housing Finance Corporation group is funded to several millions of dollars. Do any of them make any sense, and where are they?
Well, I'm not sure I'll answer the question about whether they make sense, but look, the legislature created something called the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. The legislature put that in-state gas line development corporation in the Housing Finance Corporation because they had more faith in the leadership of the Housing Finance Corporation than they did at that time in their own Department of Natural Resources or the Alaska Energy Authority. They thought about the railroad. They decided not to put it there. It is sort of weird when you think they want to create this entity to build a gas line. I'm not even sure where they wanted to put it at the time. The Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation has gotten, I think, close to $50 million since it was set up, and some people refer to it as the backstop plan. If there is no big pipeline, the state will have ready a plan to get a smaller line built just to take care of in-state demand and maybe export a little bit on the side. That corporation will come, or would like to get another $320 million from the legislature because their belief is it would take $400 million to get the package together so you could go develop this, plans, permits, and the rest. So it's a $400 million backstop plan to a $500 million subsidy to see if a big line works. First gas from that, probably 2019, 2020, if the state were to stop the big project, put the money into the smaller in-state line. The proponents talk about they don't really want the state to build it. They want the state to pay for development, pay for the building permits, get it ready, and then turn it over to the private sector. The problem with that smaller line is because it's so small, you don't get economies of scale. Without real state money in there, the gas coming out of that line would be a lot more than anyone in South Central pays now.
Eric, we're just wasting hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it was inevitable. Everybody's fighting for this, their share, but there's never going to be a need for North Slope gas down here. My theory is half of our need will be solved with a hydro dam, and half will be supplied with natural gas and coal and all the other options we have, wind, even tidal. I don't think it's a big problem, but we're wasting a lot of money, with these theories and these other lines. But I expected that. People have to have jobs,
You mean consultants have to have jobs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
sorry.
In terms of the producers, TransCanada's latest estimate, $45 to $65 billion in 2012 dollars. Some of that, well, they haven't picked a site for a liquefaction plant. Depending where it's built is going to affect that construction estimate. They are also thinking where that gas treatment plant should go. Originally, the thought was to put on the North Slope where costs are very high for construction. They're now thinking maybe it'd be better to build it at South Central. They could drive down the cost. And they haven't done the, I guess, precise engineering. The in-state line, the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation, the backstop plan, if you will, they admit their cost estimate is plus or minus 35% because they haven't spent the money to really refine that. And that's part of the problem, is how much is it going to cost? And plus or minus 35, we all know nothing ever comes on the minus 35%.
It could be exactly that. This is what happens when politicians decide that they're going to be economists. There is no underlying data that supports the idea that a so-called bullet line,
another name for the in-state line,
right, of any size. I'm not even sure what the latest estimate is for the size.
250 to 500 million cubic feet a day.
Is going to be able, can be financed outside of going into the state's pocket for it, that it can be run without the state's going into the state's pocket for, or that the gas that's produced actually has a market outside of a couple of failing businesses that happen to be in the Speaker of House's district. You know, those are the political realities of the situation. So, you know, throwing good money after bad, hey, the state does lots of it. Go back and listen to my speeches at the budget time on the floor of the House. But actually expecting it to produce any kind of a natural gas benefit outside of, like you say, consultants and you know, maybe some workers will get their chance to do it, but it's a gas pipeline, not a oil pipeline, so probably all those guys will come out of Oklahoma too. But outside of that, this baby just won't get off the ground.
How about the what?
Well, the problems in the bush aren't solved by having some sort of located pipeline of any sort. The problems in the bush is you've got a lot of small communities that have to deliver energy, basically, often over difficult terrain and in a fairly short shipping window. None of those things are going to change. You're not going to be able to build a central gas pipeline with a bunch of little fingers going to every rural community.
I think the best hope for bush, for rural Alaska, for small interior communities, if you can get the feedstock, if you can get the gas out of a big line cheap enough, it's never going to be economical to build pipes. The way you're going to get those BTUs out to those villages is pulling the propane out of the gas stream, taking the gas and compressing it, turning it into liquid, and then delivering it by barge, by truck. But you're going to have to get the base gas cheap enough, and even then it's going to take state financial involvement. I don't believe anyone can get into that business and make any money, but you could argue there's a good public purpose for the state getting that energy out to rural Alaska to get them off diesel.
Yeah, but the only problem with that is that every plan is at this point theoretical. Nobody's actually tried to do that. There's no money in it for private enterprise to try to do that. The state, for whatever reason, haven't even run a test bed on any of that. And until that happens, nobody's going to be able to figure out what it's going to cost, how it's going to get to people, who's going to pay the bill.
It's a great exercise.
Alaska is rich in energy resources. It's just far away from us and uneconomical to deliver to most residents, but I guess I'd maintain if we can figure out some way to financially assist. Mike used the word subsidize. I'm not advocating state subsidize a gas line, but see if there's a tax structure or help with financing that would, I'm trying to think of the right word, I hate incentivize. It should be banished from the English language. But if we can put together a financial structure so that private investors look at it and say, that's a decent investment, I can go compete in the world under that financial structure, then we live off the benefit of drawing gas out of that line. Otherwise, we're going to have to pay for our own damn line.
Well, my dad was a miner in his youth, and he used to say to me, you know, if it's worth $100 and it takes you $105 to get out of the ground, it's just rock. And
expensive rock.
Yeah, and the same thing is true with natural gas. You know, in part the problem is the expense of putting it together, but the real problem is it's just not worth enough when it gets there. You know, and you can just see from the last 10 years that when the price of gas, natural gas, was $6 a BCF, everybody in the world wanted to build the pipeline, right? Now it's down to 2.5, something like that, and nobody's interested.
Look, the Stranded Gas Development Act negotiations under the Murkowski administration were a disaster, politically, public policy-wise. I like Governor Murkowski. Didn't vote for him, but I like him, but that was not handled well. Unfortunately, I think unless we can get over that and have some faith that we can do a better job, we're not going to get there. We're not going to get a gas line unless we negotiate it. We need to put up, and you made the point that the state needs enough weight on its side. The state of Alaska should have the best and the brightest oil and gas economist staff in the country, and we don't. And it's nothing against the people who work there. It just hasn't gotten support, political support. I think we need to believe that we can do a better job of negotiating the next time, if we can get that next time, and try to put the Stranded Gas Development Act negotiations out of our mind. They're over with.
Yeah, and thank God for that.
I was going to say, I think we have one last question.
Thank you, Dean Stolvey. Thank you for hosting this event tonight and putting together this wonderful panel. These are three great gentlemen that I've had wonderful times with. Jack is an encouraging mentor. Mike Dugan is a travel partner to Magadan many years ago, and Larry Persley is a travel partner to Norway with the wonderful delegation that went last summer, hosted by the Institute of the North. My name is Ira Perman, former chair of the Institute of the North, also a oil and gas rights owner on the Kenai Peninsula, a rare sort of situation where I actually own private rights, and so I do tend to follow this subject a little closer than most. Two questions. One, how many of you in here would be amenable to the idea of having a Tom Marshall Day to honor the gentleman who made it possible for us to enjoy this great largesse? Just a round of applause if you. What a pleasure it is to meet you. I'm humbled. I have questions about the use of gas. I kind of like what I'm hearing here. I agree that it doesn't seem very likely we're in for a natural gas pipeline. The most recent price estimate of $45 to $65 billion was a slap in the face. I mean, a real cold water wake up. I think when we've digested those numbers, we're going to be thinking maybe this just isn't going to work. So what are a couple of other possibilities? Mr. Marshall has suggested a very good one. It's a great way to get the heavy viscous crude perhaps out off of the North Slope. But there's a couple of other ideas I'd like to see what you think of. Recently, we've been reading about taking that gas on location, turning it into electricity, and moving it south by high voltage direct current. Seems like an interesting idea. The numbers, at least that I've seen initially, look sort of promising. You can take it off in small increments or big increments. You can leave enough in place to do the heavy viscous, and still have enough to power the state. That's one. The second one is to take it and liquefy it. There's the gas to liquids process, which you can take it as gas, and instead of building another pipe, you put the liquids into the existing pipe. You can do that by a GTL process or a methanol to gasohol process. One turns it into diesel, one turns it into gasoline. You avoid the cost of the pipe. You do, of course, have enormous processing costs at the north and the south end of that, but they can be done incrementally as well. I'm told by David White, the former director of Alaska Pipeline Service Company, that could put as much as 320,000 barrels a day into the pipe. Your thoughts on this?
I'll address the issue of gas to liquids. It's a conversion process. It was used in Germany during the war because they needed liquids. It was used in South Africa when they were embargoed because of apartheid. Problem with gas to liquids conversion is you consume about 40% of the gas in the conversion process. But if you can get enough for the product at the other end, it might be worth it. Shell Oil built the world's largest gas to liquids plant in Qatar, opened up last year. It's called Pearl GTL, $20 billion investment. The economics work because Qatar gives them the gas for free. If you want to give the gas away for free on the North Slope, you might have something. And just real quickly, the question of $45 to $65 billion for a project, yeah, it's a lot of money. If you could get a price for that gas, liquefied natural gas, somewhere between what they're getting in Europe these days and Asia today in spot prices, that would generate gross revenue of about $10 billion a year before mortgage, before operating expenses. A big project like that generates a lot of money to pay off a mortgage, even if it's $65 billion. So it's still possible.
But it's new ideas like that, Ira, that we've got to think about. It may take, seriously, well, I don't know. I mean, we've got to come up with something. It seemed to me that's a perfect study to take place at the University of Alaska.
I actually wanted to ask his first question, so I'm going to hold you guys' feet to the fire. What about the gas to electric, DC? Using gas to generate electric power, DC current. That's been kicked around.
I don't know.
The problem with that is, who does it? Mm-hmm. You assume that you can get your consumers to use electricity, as they do a lot of places, but you'll notice that in your house you use the electricity for certain things, but not for other things. So you sort of don't solve the overall problems for consumers, particularly in rural Alaska. And the other question is, who pays for it? Even if you could run, and I'm relatively up on what's going on with various attempts to run electricity long distances without losing as much of it as you do typically. But it's an economic question. I have no idea, for instance, how much it would cost to do that. I don't think that there's been any information of that sort around. And I suspect that it's going to cost a lot of money, that you're not going to be able to to make the end consumer pay, because it's probably going to be too expensive for them to even flip the light switch. And so it seems to me that it means that the government's going to have to pay for it. And then the question becomes, okay, how much? And what's the political climate, I guess I would say, that's going to allow that kind of thing to be done?
Well, I can't vouch for their numbers. You might everybody take a look at Alaska Village Electric Cooperative, AVAC. They're the ones that have done some numbers on them and be worth a look at. And one final thing, the Institute of the North is hosting a tour this year to Iceland, where we are going to be studying exactly this. They're working on a high voltage direct current from Iceland to Scotland, and we want to see how that one works. So we're taking a junket to Iceland in the winter, in case anyone, you want to join us.
I want to thank everybody for your participation. One of the things that I found out after I accepted to say that I would be moderator was that's a fancy word for timekeeper. And unfortunately, we're out of time. Perhaps if you might corral one of the speakers as they're heading out, but I think the hour is getting late and they've been here for quite a while. So I apologize for those of you who still wanted to ask some questions. But again, I want to thank each one of the panelists for their time, and all of those in the audience that stuck with us, and the donors that helped to make this event possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
This program made possible by the Office of the Federal Coordinator for Alaska Natural Gas Transportation Projects, the University of Alaska Anchorage, and 360 North.